Hi, my name is Aileen Dashrova, and I'm here with my very good friend Lissa Black-Fassett. And we are going to talk today about something that is pretty intense. It's something that a lot of people do not talk about. However, Lissa and I thought it was really time to talk about it. It is uncomfortable, perhaps, and yet it is prevalent in our society. It's prevalent especially in our high school students and our young adults. And we're here to talk today with Lissa and have her tell a little bit about her story with her son Darby, who died of an overdose at age 23, 5 years ago, of heroin when he was attending UMass Amherst. And so we're just going to pretty much wing it. Lissa and I have been working together on this for 5 years, and we're just going to let truth come out so that we can participate in a conversation with families, with friends, and just in the reality that drug addiction is out there, how it affects families, how it affects friends, how it affects our society, and especially heroin. So, Lissa?
Well, as Aileen said, 5 years ago, my husband and I got a call late at night, 10 o'clock. We just talked to our son that day. It was just a run-of-the-mill day. We got a call at 10 or 11 o'clock from the paramedics saying that our son Darby was being rushed to the hospital and they were performing life-saving operations. And this was just a punch to the gut. It was shocking. It was so shocking that we pretty much drove. We had to drive about 2 hours to get to the hospital where he was up in Amherst. And all along the way, Dan and I were just almost catatonic. I don't think we even talked. We had no idea what was happening here. When we got to the hospital, we had found out after waiting there for some while that he had indeed died of a drug overdose. Now, our world exploded at that point, and the fact that it was a heroin overdose completely blindsided us. We had no idea that he had been doing heroin. We knew there were signs all along the way, and that's part of what I want to talk about, is how these things are kept invisible from the culture, from parents who don't want to see these things. There were signs, there were red flags, but there were always other explanations for him, and we simply did not want to think this. It never occurred to us, and basically I can say I had my head in the sand, and I didn't see it. So in order, to not just to have your child die, but to die of something that you had no idea, and that you think that perhaps you could have had control over this in some way. We weren't really given a chance. But basically, what I want to talk about, because this is, I mean, my life has been completely transformed, and actually in some wonderful ways. I have my son to thank for this, actually. But when we're talking about, and I think that's one thing I really want to say here. This is something we don't talk about in this society. We simply don't talk about it. And if we do talk about it, it has to do with other people, not our children, not our suburban, well-reared children. But I'm here to tell you it does. And I want to talk about, and Aileen and I have talked a lot about this over the last 5 years, about the culture of shame that surrounds the whole idea of addiction and heroin in particular.
Yes.
It was a shocking revelation to me how prevalent and available and cheap heroin is, and how it is a recreational drug for many college students. I didn't know this. And another part of this is the guilt that parents go through, and I can only speak for myself. But from the very beginning, it's almost like we were going, having had our minds completely blown apart, and we're thinking, well, we need to write an obituary. Do we mention this? Do we mention this to our friends? And I had a moment of saying no because I want to protect him. And then I'm thinking, I'm not protecting him by doing this, and I'm not protecting anybody else. So we have been very forthright about this, and I have talked about it, but I say in all honesty, I have struggled many years with this, in dealing with this, and the shame that surrounds it, and the guilt that surrounds it. And if there's one thing I've learned in these past 5 years, is that the issue of shame goes further, way further in our culture than the heroin, the addiction, the overdose, the way that he died. It's the way we shame ourselves in so many ways, and that I think that feeds into the reason that people do drugs, the reason that people are feel compelled to be in a place where they don't feel that darkness. It's so I think that we really need to just talk about this, really just get it out there, get it out of the closet. This happens to everybody. This happens across all kinds of socioeconomic levels, and it's like I said, it's cheap and it's available, and people want to feel good. They want to. There's a reason people do drugs, and they want to feel good. It is. If we could take this aspect of shame away from it and talk about it openly with each other, and also, in my case, and my husband and I, we really, there may have been signs for this, but like I said, there were explanations for them. We didn't want to think this. We wanted to believe in our son's honesty. We wanted to believe him. We didn't want him to think that he could be suffering like this.
I'm thinking about some of his poetry.
Yes, and he left poetry. He was a writer. He was a very gifted writer. He was a musician, and a lot of his poems really addressed the suffering that he was going through, just being alive in this world, and feeling out of place, and feeling, and he was a very, very good liar. He wanted to protect us, and he didn't want us to be part of what he knew would be a very long struggle with and I know that a lot of parents go through that. They try everything with their kids, everything under the sun, from recovery programs to hard clinics. Love, clinics and
rehab, halfway houses,
and experimental treatments. Kicking them out because there's no other, and then saying, well, did we do the right thing? Let's take them back. I mean, I have heard this from, when I talk about this with people, you would just be amazed at how many people have similar stories. And I think that just in me telling my story and giving people a forum, to say that it's safe to talk about this, there's many stories about this, and we need to start telling our stories. And
it is. This is I think in particular we're choosing to start this off talking about heroin because I think it surprises people when parents think about their kids. They think, oh yeah, they're gonna maybe drink beer in high school. Oh, maybe they'll try some pot. I don't think a lot of parents understand that their children have easy access to heroin. And we were talking to a friend of ours today who said, oh yeah, my daughter got it at the local fast food restaurant in the parking lot for $6. So it is a very cheap, because people say, why heroin? Because it's very cheap. I have the opportunity to work with youth and young adults and parents and families with addictions, among other things that I have the honor to be a part of. And marijuana costs a lot of money. This is a really quick, easy, accessible, inexpensive way to get high. And as many of you may know from watching television shows, right? Wow, it's a quick addiction. It's a quick addiction, and it quickly can destroy your child, your young adult. You, if you're watching, if you're a youth or a young adult, or even an adult who's using heroin, then you know the insanity, and at some point perhaps we'll get to hear one or two of Darby's poems in which he writes about his addiction to heroin. Mm-hmm. It's incredible, and it's important to hear it. It's important to say it. It's the hard stuff, and that's one of the things that Lissa is talking about, that if we do not address the hard stuff, we do such, it's imperative. We do a disservice to ourselves, to humanity, by not talking about this reality of the hard stuff. It does not go away. Lissa and I have spoken about the things that she saw over the years. It turned out that Darby had had an overdose already and had been in the hospital. And I can't even imagine just the pain and the frustration of Lissa and Dan being there at the hospital after Darby had died, and this information coming out then that he had already been there. And them saying, well, why didn't you tell us? Well, he was overage. We couldn't tell you. So parents are looking at their young adult children who are of age to legally take care of themselves. No information has to be given to parents about their young adult children. And they are going into hospitals. They are ODing on drugs. And nobody has to know. Nobody needs to know. No one needs to be contacted about it. And I think that was such a huge thing, as I recall, for you to say,
right.
Oh my gosh, this is a hospital. How could they not tell us? And legally, they couldn't. And then Lissa looking at some of the signs, like, well, he did have this sore. But again, there was always an excuse. And for me, one of the most difficult things to say to a parent when it gets to that point with their child of any age, to say you can no longer believe your child.
Mm-hmm. That's the thing. That's the thing. Speaking for myself and my experience, I wanted to believe him, and he's telling me that everything's going well and that his grades are great and that he's, and we found out later that many of his friends would say, well, where'd Darby go? He just dropped off the face of the earth. We haven't heard from him in 6 months. They didn't feel comfortable in betraying their friend by calling us. So now they have guilt. We have guilt. And that's another aspect of this whole thing, is the guilt that you feel as a parent. And I have to say that of all, when your child dies, you work through this idea of guilt eventually, but in the beginning, of all the things that you feel guilty about, if your child died in an accident that was totally out of his control, you would still feel guilt. Mm-hmm. I guarantee it. Because there's something you could have done, But I'll tell you, the hardest thing for me, and it's taken me I'm still not there with this. Heroin was the most difficult thing to come to terms with in terms of his death and our grief and all of that. Because how could I have not seen it? Mm-hmm. How could I have not seen the signs? How could I have been so out of touch? And all of these things are swirling around with that. And let's face it, there is shame. Right. There is shame and there is blame surrounding this kind of drug use.
To tell people.
Yes, to tell people.
Oh, my kid was a drug addict.
Exactly.
And he shot, heroin into himself and now he's dead.
And again, we shake our heads and say that's really too bad when it happens to a stereotypical, which is another whole aspect of this, that these are all of our children, and this is something else that's just kind of opened up a whole vista for me, and in terms of being real about this. No kid is a statistic, That's
right.
And one of the things that we've started, we had worked with a drug and alcohol awareness program near where we live, and we talked to the director of that, and one thing he told us is, as awful as this sounds, in a way, the suburban kids have less of a chance of really surviving something like this because they don't have the street skills to know, about the whole aspect of heroin and how it's cut and how it's who's selling it, and all of those kinds of things, or to not do it alone. That there's a whole culture around that too. And all of this stuff is hidden. It's hidden from view. We don't talk about it, and if we do talk about it, we talk about it with judgment. And we cannot do that, because this is our children. They're all our children. Right. And I am proud of my son. I don't feel 1 ounce of shame, and I never have. And when I started feeling this, well, should I tell people? Should we do this? And I said, well, of course. I mean, really, I'm proud of him. I love him. I still love him. And I know that one of the reasons he didn't talk to us was because he didn't want to burden us with this. And we didn't get the chance to do what some parents are, this is another side of this. Parents, and I have many friends who've gone through this, that they do know, they have known that their children are doing heroin, and as I spoke before, they've gone through hell, basically, dealing with everything. And that's a kind of grieving too. It is definitely grieving. And the ultimate part of that is that at some point you have to understand that there are some things you have no control over.
That's the second toughest thing to say to parents.
Exactly.
And to know that their health, the healthiness of the family system, is when the other members can surrender and say, there's a good chance my child will die. There's a good chance my sibling will die. There's a good chance that I will get the phone call and my child will be found in the state forest where he or she has been living, because that's the only place they can afford to live. So these two big pieces of understanding, coming to terms with a reality that no one wants to have to come to terms with, and yet life is what it is. Number one, you cannot believe anything your child says. As beautiful, and I had such a joy of knowing Darby, and still knowing Darby. Beautiful boy, beautiful, blonde hair, gorgeous eyes. I mean, a face, the old face like an angel. And I could see him looking and saying, "Oh, I'm fine. Everything's great at school. Everything's great." Meanwhile, he's going back to campus, shooting heroin, writing these incredibly painful poems. It's no one's fault. It's not the parents' fault.
No.
It's not the school's fault. It's not the friend's fault. It's nobody's fault. And then the second piece, in Liz's situation, Darby was dead before they had an opportunity to really grab hold of this truth about what was going on for him. I have many friends, people I've worked with, who it's been a long journey. And the conversation, I've brought my kid here, I've done this with my child. My child is 20. Can I keep them in rehab? I had some parents, and they were taking their child to rehab who was old enough to be their own legal guardian. And I said, do not leave your child alone. Do not turn your back on your child. And next thing I'll get a phone call on the way to rehab, the child that said they needed to go to the bathroom, and they climbed out the window, called friends that then came and picked them up. So you cannot believe your child. It's not your child. It's the drug that's speaking. It's not your child. Saying you cannot believe your child does not mean stop loving your child.
Right.
Love your child. Love your child. Do not believe a word that they say. And then if your child continues in this process of addiction, which is very likely, there will be many things offered, and yes, they can be expensive, and no, insurance doesn't cover a lot of them, and that's another huge issue for parents. How much money, how much debt, how much time, and how much emotional highs and lows to go through. And we think, well, it's my child, it's my child, and then it gets to the point where you can't go down with your child. And that's the point where parents have been through so much. They've lost so much in their perception. I think the biggest piece of loss is their sense of their own center, their sense of their own awareness of who they are in the process. And that is when the surrender happens, which is there is nothing more that I can do. This is my child's journey. This is my sister's journey. This is my brother's journey. I can speak up. I can hope that other members of my family get it. It's inevitable that that person who is addicted to heroin, who is out of their mind because of the heroin, is the one that makes all the decisions, is the one that has to make that choice. At that point, is it a choice? Is it desperation? Is it, we talk about lows in a lot of the 12-step programs, is a low. I sat next to some people at this program that Lissa was speaking about, and young kids, 22, 23 years old, shaking, holding my hands, talking about how they're struggling to try to get off heroin themselves. They'd come to that point. Mm-hmm. And it is a tough drug to get away from. That is one gripping drug. That is one gripping drug. So it is a journey that doesn't go away if you go to sleep at night. It does not go away if you listen to your child's big, open, beautiful eyes. There is innocence in there. There is love in there. There is authenticity in there. Just is not going to come out in their words because they can't help it. And if we don't talk about it, more of our children are going to die.
And that's what I wanted to say as well, that there's a broader perspective here. There's the social issues and the drugs and the way you as a parent respond to this. But there's also the systemic problem. Why do people do drugs? Why do people feel the need for that in our society, the way our society is structured? And my feeling is that has to do with why we need to talk about this. We need to tell our stories because we are not part of a common story. The way we kind of live in this world now, you know, we're separated. We feel separated. We feel lonely. We feel apart. And by the very act of me telling this, and another parent telling this, and another parent, an aunt telling this, an uncle, a sister, a brother, whatever that is, by telling this story and having some way of being able to connect with all of that is a way that we turn the power towards love rather than shame and blame.
Yes.
No shame, no blame, no invisibility. And also the aspect, like that Aileen was saying, that you know, as a parent, there is a point where you have to separate out what you can control and what you can't control, and you must be able to let go. And as strange as this sounds, it's an act of love to do that,
Yes.
and to understand that your child has a path of his or her own. And I know that sounds a little cliche, but it's the truth. So I think in saying that is what I'm trying to say is that you can free up all the resources you have to help your child in the way you can, which is basically to love them. And I think
to forgive them.
And to forgive them.
But that's a whole other that's a whole other thing.
There's many
there's a lot of things that we're going to talk about, and we wanted to just give you a little clip to start with, to fill you in with Lissa's story and a little bit about her son. And there are, I mean, this is just one teeny bit. It's been an incredible ride and journey, and we've done it together in so many ways, often. And it's been fantastic. So there is a lot more to talk about that we're going to share about Darby. I know when I said, you know, it's nobody's fault, I could imagine a bunch of people were thinking, but what about the guy that gave him the drugs? And we're going to hit on that too. So thank you for coming and listening to us. And we want to hear your comments. We're going to stay with this particular topic for a while to keep talking about all the different aspects of heroin, drug abuse, children dying. That's another piece that will come up from it. The shame, the healing, the transformation that happens through a process if we are willing to be really present with the process. And I will say that Lissa is an amazing woman, and what she has to share is incredibly powerful, incredibly real, authentic. I am just so proud and so happy to be here with Lissa and to have had this much of the journey with her. I knew Darby for a while before I met Lissa, and he definitely has had his hand in us getting to spend so much time together in the transformation and the truth that is arising, has arisen, is arising now, will continue to come up from his life and his journey.
Yes, we are still on a journey, both Aileen and Darby and me, and all those who love him. So I'm very thankful and grateful.
Good. And we'll see you in our next little clip.